Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've got I'm going to be joined by three panelists who all play a fundamental role in the partnership needed to turn words to action. So please, could you join me in welcoming, first of all, Deborah Markowitz, who's the Secretary of the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. Deb, hi, how are you? And then could you please join me in welcoming Amal-Lee Amin, who's the head of all things climate change and sustainability at the Inter-American Development Bank. And last but by no means least, Rafael Gonzalez Sanchez, who's the CEO of ENEL Green Power for North America. Thanks very much. Okay. How's everybody doing? Yeah, great. You're all focused on action. Fantastic. So what we're going to do is have a little chat about what it takes, looking very much at the energy sector and how the energy sector plays into the economy writ large. So, you know, we have a state, province. We've been talking about the important role of the sub-sovereigns and all of this. We have a multilateral development financier, and we have a bona fide, real, all the way through business, and a very interesting part of the business. ENEL is a very, very important utility right in the claws of this transition from what we were to what we need to be as an energy sector by the mid-2020s. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to you, Deb. I mean, so Vermont, famous for all kinds of reasons at the moment, but huge international attention on the Clean Power Plan, huge international attention on the role that provinces and cities play together with national governments. I mean, there you are at the pointy end of this business, trying to make things work at the local level. What is sort of the action needed that, from your perspective, how do you drive this transition forward?
Well, thank you for that question. I guess I want to first note that, you know, as you take a look at nations' plans for how they're going to accomplish their obligations under the Paris Agreement, you'll see if you look at the United States that there's a gap. There's only so much that the Clean Power Plan will do, that the CAFE standards for cars and the standards for light trucks and other vehicles will do. There's a gap that needs to be filled by innovation on the state level. And I know those of you from other parts of the world like this idea of the laboratory of democracy. That's the states. We get to innovate and try things that then might get adopted, you know, by our sister states or by national policy. And you know, speaking for Vermont, there are places where we have been acting and we're seeing results. We have an efficiency utility, the first state in the nation, probably the first place in the world that has an electric utility that's only about efficiency. There's a charge that people pay on their bill, and it goes to finance efficiency. As a result, we've saved Vermonters millions of dollars, both in rates, but also in actual savings. We were able to, you know, this is also a social equity issue, right? How do we make it cheaper for our low-income Vermonters to power their lives? In addition, over the past 5 years, we have doubled our renewable energy deployment. So we've gone from 15% of our portfolio to 30%. And that's from incentives and policies that really have made a difference. And in fact, it's driven our economy. 1 out of 20 jobs in Vermont are in the renewable or the clean energy sector. And it lifts all boats. And then, of course, finally, as you know, because of your background, we're a member of RGGI. I'm on the board of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's a market. Anyone out there who's interested in markets, I'm very happy to talk to you about RGGI and how successful it's been as a model. And what that does, back to thinking about equity, because we want to lift all boats. It's raised $3 billion for the region that we've put back into energy savings in Vermont. We use our tens of millions of dollars towards weatherization for low-income Vermonters, right? Because we're a cold state. leaky houses is like pouring money out the wall, and it's a win-win. So those are a few examples of where states can innovate and lead. Cities are awesome too, but we've got the power often of really putting in tax incentives, putting in regulatory policies that can jumpstart this whole conversion to a clean energy economy.
I just want to follow up with one more question before we go on to Amal and to Ricky. So you talked about RGGI, but if we think about North America as a region, right? You've now got this friendly government just north of you. The attractive. We
love Quebec.
Yes, and you have the attractive pin-up boy of Prime Minister Trudeau, the everybody's favourite climate leader at the moment, and then, of course, Mexico has been really moving forward as well. I mean, if you looked into a crystal ball, what's it going to take to sort of have a node of smart energy pricing in North America that could sort of be a counterbalance to what we think China's going to do in 2017 and what we hope Europe's going to get moving again? I mean, is this something that at the state level you think about?
Well, so we're a state that abuts Quebec. It's actually closer for me to go to Montreal than it is to Boston or New York. So we really see them as our major trade partner, our neighbor, and we're also the conduit for their clean energy out of Hydro-Quebec down into the more populated areas. So we see that as a win-win from our perspective. I think the real question you're asking is it possible to create a carbon market that's conjoined? And there's a lot of conversations about that, but it's complicated because these are very complicated systems. They're market systems, so we have to be careful because it can have a big impact on our utility industry. And with the Clean Power Plan, which those of you who are worried that maybe it'll never happen, don't worry, it's going to happen. Just be patient. And meanwhile, it's still working because it does send a very strong market signal. It will end up forcing states across the nation to think about carbon markets. And so we, through RGGI, are starting to think about, we're going through every 3 years, we take a look at our program. We're taking a look at our program with that in mind. Is there a way to think about our program going forward in a way that would allow us to have conjoined markets or to allow new members into our markets? Now, the Western Climate Initiative is a different version of carbon market, slightly different rules, and Quebec has joined as well as another province in Canada, Ontario, and others may be following. That's very interesting to us, but and what I love about it, frankly, personally, speaking unofficially, is that it's all fuels. It's not just looking at the electric sector, which I think is essential if we're going to get this right, but because it covers different things and has slightly different rules, it's complicated.
Okay, so you heard it here first. Clean Power Plant, it's going to happen. There's going to be one. So if the Supremes just down the road are listening, we're very confident here in this room. So let's move to Amal, to the Americas writ large, and I think one of the things that came out of the discussions this morning, and you heard from the Secretary General and everybody, that to get to where we need to go, we need an energy transition. It's not business as usual. It's not business as usual for anybody. It's not business as usual for a development bank. So, how do you think through the process of helping your client countries and, I suppose, the private sector in the region as well, drive that transition forward?
Thank you. Yes, and we certainly at the IDB, we've responded to Paris by formalizing, taking to governors a climate doubling target to double our climate finance by 2020. And have recently, just this week, in fact, created a whole new department focused on climate and sustainable development that will work across the IDB group, very importantly with our private sector and the public sector, to bring together both the expertise and the resources to best support our clients, whether that's the governments, subnational governments working with a lot of cities. And in fact, within this new department, we've created a whole new division on sustainable housing and urban development, which builds on an initiative we've had for 5 years, but takes it to the next level. So we are responding at an institutional level. But of course, what's most critical really is how we engage with countries, in country, with key players, key stakeholders. And so the Paris Agreement, obviously a fantastic signal of incredibly strong political commitment within our region. All of our countries, except for one, submitted their INDC. And so we are now talking to them, and in particular talking to ministries of finance as our main partners in country, to say, okay, let's see how now we can take the INDC and really move to implement that. But actually also thinking not just about implementing what's there, but also potentially going beyond what is there. And so we very much see that the INDCs, and they're quite sort of variable in the approach they take. They pretty much all do include some element of relating to the energy sector, but of course other sectors, particularly the agriculture sector, is particularly important in our region. And so what we're doing now is saying, well, okay, we've already got a lot of activities. We've been working a lot at the project level, at the sector level, but we really need to look more at the economy-wide level and see how the INDCs provide initial commitments that we can really help to take forward through critically support for strengthening institutions, creating and aligning the policy and regulatory framework, creating price signals, so creating a price for carbon, but also reducing the negative price signals that fossil fuel subsidies provide. And working very much at that institutional level, but not waiting until we get the perfect investment climate in place, because we know that will take time. The challenges are, for anyone that's worked inside a government, it's not easy to transform, turn a government round in terms of its direction, and the importance of bringing industries, like you mentioned, utilities, and all the employees that work in these organizations need to be brought along. So in addition to focusing on the institutional framework, actually looking at where we can promote investments that also start to demonstrate the benefits and the opportunities for new businesses, creation of new domestic markets. This is going to be really essential in this period to ensure that the countries and their whether it's consumers, the general public, businesses, actually see that there are opportunities in making this transition. So, I think I could go on in a lot more detail. One thing I do want to say that from an energy perspective in our region, I think one issue that's becoming, and it's starting to keep me awake at night, I have to say, is we have a relatively clean energy matrix in Latin America. But because of climate impacts, hydropower is becoming less and less feasible moving forward. So there is a very real risk that some of the countries, as they look to transition away from hydro, which in countries like Brazil is 70% of their electricity, that they will start to look at alternatives, including fossil fuels. And potentially the energy matrix will go in the opposite direction. So it really is a critical time now to focus on both those opportunities, but also we need to start to look at climate resilience within the energy sector too, as a key necessary part of the transition.
Can I just follow you up on that point? So one of the energy sources that gets completely ignored is energy productivity, and increasing that. And and I think some of the figures around hydro in Latin America are really quite frightening. I understand why you're awake at 3 o'clock, but you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly in the region from an energy productivity point of view. You've got sort of Mexico and others who've really driven that forward. You've got Venezuela, Argentina, who perhaps haven't prioritized this as much. So it seems to me that in the whole debate around energy productivity, and there's a big conference here in DC next week on this, it's sort of like, well, the private sector will drive efficiency, but all of the economies that have made major advances of this in the past have done it because it's been led from the top. It's been a political issue. California made it a major issue, Denmark, etc. I mean, how do you make energy productivity sexy in Latin America? You can do it. Amal, you can do it if anybody can.
That's a good question. Well, I suppose, I think to a certain extent, because hydro has been, up until recently, abundant and safe, there hasn't been such a focus really on the energy productivity side of things. But as we've seen, and particularly this year with El Nino, very strong El Nino, many countries are suffering severe power shortages. And so that really it should be an opportunity for really improving the efficiency, the energy efficiency, both of energy production and, of course, consumption, which actually I think we don't really acknowledge so clearly the real economic benefits of energy efficiency for economies. And so hopefully, with the energy crisis, this can be an opportunity to also improve productivity of the energy system and so competitiveness as well, particularly of key industries. I mean, similarly for the countries that are the oil and gas producers, because prices are so low now, many countries in the region are really, wondering, well, not wondering, but worried about their economic growth. I was in Trinidad recently, and they know they need to diversify the economy, and now with oil prices so low, again, this can be a real opportunity for them to say, okay, well, what other alternative sources of economic growth are there, and how can we achieve those?
So that's great. So now, maybe, Rafael, I mean, if there's a sector of industry that is right in the heart of the transition that's needed, it is the utility sector. It's the energy companies that we've relied upon so much in the past. And I mean, I know that ENEL as a group has put a lot of thinking into what this transition looks like and what it means for you. I mean, you're the CEO of the green end of the business here in the Americas. I mean, where do you think how does this transition happen? What happens to companies like yours, the parent, and where are the opportunities? And what do you need from the state regulators, what do you need from the development banks to really spearhead this transition?
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting to take part in this Climate Action 2016. First, let me present ENEL and what we are doing. We are walking the walk. We are doing. We are taking actions. We have been taking actions for many years on this area. ENEL is a global utility, as you have said, that has conventional generation, distribution, retail, and also renewables. In renewables, Enel Power is the company that is dedicated to develop, construct, and operate renewables plants. We have been working for years in building a portfolio. Just now we have 10.5 gigawatts of installed capacity, excluding large hydro. Including large hydro, we have more than 30 gigawatts of installed capacity worldwide. The total production of Enel Power is similar to the consumption of the households of Massachusetts, for example. So we are producing renewable energy. And we invest in the different technologies. So we are not monotechnology. So we invest in wind, in hydro, in geo, in biomass, in solar. So diversification is one of our key values. And not only in terms of technology, as well in terms of geography. So we have presence, Enel Power has presence in 19 countries worldwide, in 4 continents. In Europe, the base for us, in Americas, in Asia, and Africa. So how is the transformation, as you have said, from a conventional utility to a new utility, more focused on sustainability, more focused on green energy and lower carbon emissions? So we have committed at group level and level to invest, to continue to invest in renewables and to have 50% of our production by 2019 will come from renewables in the coming years. So this is our commitment. Also, we have committed in long term to give the idea of the transformation that we will be carbon neutral. So that means for the utilities is a great challenge in 2040. But not only this, we are working as well in providing energy to the people that just now doesn't have energy. So we have committed to invest in new areas in Africa and Latin America to provide energy by 2020 to new 3 million people that just now they don't have energy. And we think that it's also important not only to build the plants, it's also to work with the local communities, to be integrated and to create value, to create shared value, not only to invest and to produce energy, it's to continue to be engaged with local communities for long term. So this is very important. In this sense, we have a specific plan as well to programs of education, social activities, to extend this, to create value for almost 1 million of benefit of people in 2020. So this is a deep transformation that has made that ENEL has been appreciated by the investors, sustainability funds for this change, for this transformation, and has been ranked in the Fortune magazine as the 5th company that is changing the world. The second question that you have made that is related, so this is the things that we are doing, and the second question is, what are we asking to the regulators or to the federal administration or to the state administration? So it's okay. We have the experience. We are having now the technology, the innovation. So this is very important as well. But we must have also the support of the administration and the government in this sense, because this is a long-term investment. So we must have the regulatory framework that must be stable and predictable. I come from Spain, that this is not the best example in terms of transformation in the last years. But we did very well by almost 20 years. We built 25 gigawatts with a very stable regulatory framework. Then things changed. And here in US now, we are the reference for the world in this sense. For the first time, we are having a long perspective. We can look forward, not in 15 days or 1 month to take decisions. So it's important to have this stability in long term. And it's important as well to have the support in developing, and particularly in US. In other areas, it will be more long term. But it's related to have the infrastructure, to have the interconnections ready to absorb this increase, and even to invest in infrastructure in the developing countries. And sure, so we are asking this, but we are offering on the other side, as I have said, the opportunity to create value locally with the local communities, local counties, and the states, and so on. So this is.
So this is fascinating. I mean, I think that there's one thing which Spain is very predictable. When it comes, well, I mean, here we have, a Champions League final between Atletico and Real. I mean, this is becoming predictable. But anyway, so
good result just today.
But anyway, so moving on. I thought it was very interesting that you talked about the fact that you've been on this journey for a while as ENEL. Here you are, the fifth biggest company that's changing the world. It seems to me that we don't have a lot of time, right? The one thing we don't have as we pursue this race to combat climate change is time. So there must have been a quality of leadership in ENEL that got you to this point now. So what's the quality of leadership we need in all companies? I mean, across the whole utility sector. I mean, I mean, that can come from a predictable, stable regulatory environment where you can see that long-term horizon, but where does that leadership self-generate within a company?
So you mean, how can we accelerate this within the company?
How can we have more ENELs? What kind of leadership is necessary in
more
companies?
ENELs. So I think that this, okay, I think that in general, the utility companies and the conventional utilities companies are changing. So I am participating here in several meetings with the local U.S. Big companies, big utilities, and I am perceiving just now this transformation as well. So these companies are just now thinking forward and thinking greener. So this transformation is already producing in the sector. So this is a question of it's not easy because a company is huge in terms of employees. We have 70,000 employees here in the States. Our companies with even more employees. Assets that are carbon, coal, nuclear, big hydro, so on, to transform these organizations and the vision and the strategy of the company, and to shift to this new vision. So we have recently communicated to the market this new image for us, this new vision for us that is more than this. It's a profound transformation of the company. Let's say the transformation of the company are not easy to carry out. So this is something that is taking time, but we are doing well. So we are, and the advantage is the more you accelerate this transformation, the better you can be more competitive. So we are demonstrating. We have seen that renewables, in our case, it will be in the coming 5 years will be 50% of our investment. It will be in renewables. Will be based on this. So this is renewables is being competitive now in the most of the places and most of the tenders. You can see recently the last tenders in solar and wind that have been incredibly competitive. So this is the market is pushing all the companies to accept and to integrate and to lead this transformation as well.
So I think you described this race to the top, which is beginning. You're beginning to see that happen. You're obviously in a leadership position. You've obviously decided that that's the race that you want to compete in. We go back to a state level, or we go back, and also for you, Amal, in a moment when you're thinking of the clients that you're working with, how much of this is a race from something which is going to be very unstable and difficult, the whole question of stranded assets, etc., and how much of this is a race to a clean, green future? I mean, does the distinction matter? I mean, when you're trying to attract businesses into Vermont, how much are you conscious that that clean, green, predictable, stable, well-regulated state is how you're marketing?
So that's a great question, right? So we all know that one of the challenges is that as we transform our electric sector to a more distributed model, as opposed to a centralized utility that delivers electrons, right? There's a lot of wires and poles related to that are really different than a distributed model. That's going to be challenging, and government has to play a role in that transformation. And at some point, there will be stranded assets, and at some point, you're going to have duplicate systems as you make that transition. I think the more interesting question that I grapple with is, if you think about earlier today, there was a conversation about how we're going to reach these goals. And right now, the path looks like electrification. We need to rely on more electric for transportation. We need to have innovations for heating. We need to cut our use of energy by at least a third, and that's at least our goal in Vermont. And the elephant in the room, though, relates to consumer choice. So we can have awesome utilities that really are forward-looking, that are putting in renewables, but unless we get consumers to think about weatherizing their home and making that investment, or thinking about transportation that's electric rather than fossil fuel driven, or thinking about changing their heating systems, and then think about poor people who don't have many choices. How do we make that happen? And right now there's so much consumer confusion. Who do they trust? How do they make those good choices? And how do we finance those millions and millions of decisions? I think that's an interesting question. And so in Vermont, we're innovating, we're trying something out, and it's working with our utility because we thought about, who's the trusted messenger? Because to be honest, I wish it was me, but I'm government. And so the trusted messenger when it comes to energy is the utility. People are paying their bill every month. They call them when the electric isn't working. And so we're working with our utility. It's going to be required, so that over time, they're going to be taking a total energy approach and doing on-bill finance for these conversions. And they're going to be the ones offering technical assistance to consumers so they can end up having a zero-energy home. That's the goal. And we've already piloted it in a handful of homes, focusing on lower-income Vermonters, where they, in fact, pay less every month for energy. And they've got an electric heat pump, they're on solar, they have a weatherized home. So the bonus, and what they really love, is they're warm and comfortable for the first time. So I think that's going to be the interesting question. And we need our utilities to be the partner. We need our financial institutions to be partners.
In the rest of the region?
Yeah, well, specifically on the point around stranded assets, we've started some work on this last year, actually, to really start to understand within the region what the potential is there. Not surprisingly, the water sector is coming up very vulnerable. And so not just as relates to the energy system, but also for water supply. And so that's something, as we're generating that understanding, both as an institution, as a bank, but more importantly, really with our clients, with the governments, the challenge then is, well, what do we do with that information? And so again, it goes back to how do we understand the risk, but then look at where the opportunities may come. And so this is really, I would say it's a journey that we're on with our governments and also with the private sector. And, at the end of the day, we don't even know fully what the real risks are, because the Paris Agreement, we've all committed to stay below 2 degrees, which, actually in some parts of the world means quite much higher than 2 degrees. And yet, we really need to understand how best to strengthen our ability to adapt and manage these risks moving forward. So it is, I would say it's a journey, and it involves all of us. We need governments, we need utilities, we need individuals, we need to, we all need to understand the challenges. But I do think we have to also avoid a situation where it's seen as despair, because there is, the risk of that is then we all go, okay, let's just go and adapt to the climate impacts, and don't see that actually, the low carbon transition provides opportunities for, a whole range of new types of jobs and activities that will strengthen and hopefully reduce poverty and increase a more equitable future. The Sustainable Development Goals, I think, also, in addition to Paris, provide us with a very clear set of very comprehensive objectives that we now need to work towards. And as I think as everyone has said here, it is about moving forward together and trying to realize those opportunities that are there, and ensuring that we manage the transition in as smooth as possible way, because otherwise we'll, the alternative is a very potentially disruptive and quite frightening transition.
So we've got a few minutes left, and I think it's been interesting that we've talked about, the millions of little choices that get made by individuals, by households, by small businesses. We've looked at this from the perspective of government, of multilateral bank, of utility, and so one of the things in Sustainable Energy for All that we're very conscious of is that there's a sort of a Monday morning choice issue, right? For you as government, for company decisions, for development banks. And it seems that communication is a very big part of this. If this isn't communicated as a bright future of opportunity, then that making that decision on a Monday morning is all the more difficult if it's seen as a future of having to give up things and a future of scarcity and a future of fear. So whether you feel that you're a trusted mouthpiece or not, what's the most important message that has to be communicated about the energy transition or about this energy future that we're building that people need to understand? I mean, or you would like people to understand? I don't know who wants to go first. Amal, you're nodding, so maybe you should go first. But to be fair to the other two, but I think that there seems to be. In this room, everybody's communicating to everybody all of the time, and then there's this big wide world out there that isn't thinking about these things on a day-to-day basis. So how do we communicate that this is possible, affordable, and it can be clean and it can be positive?
You just said that's what we need to communicate, but absolutely. I mean, when we look at the cleaner and the more sustainable energy services, there's very little downside to those. They don't produce local air quality problems. They don't, indoor air pollution, which kills millions of women and children throughout the world every year. A sustainable energy future, really brings very significant benefits with very little downside. Until recently, the downside was seen as the high cost and a high upfront cost. But thankfully, prices have come down dramatically. There was an auction recently in Mexico where the solar and prices have plummeted. So, that's no longer the barrier anymore, which for years it was. And we all knew through economies of scale we would get to a point where the cost would come down. And that's happened a lot quicker. And to a certain extent, partly because China has invested so much in the renewable energy sector. And obviously, as such a big market, they've really helped to bring the prices down globally. And we need to ensure that that benefits all countries and that all citizens in all countries are able to have affordable, sustainable energy services. And, I think the technological potential is clearly there. The, cost is no longer a barrier, but what it requires is political will to turn our organizations around, our governments, our utilities, our banks, towards these opportunities.
Rafael?
Okay, I think this is a challenge. I will be brief because we have no time. But the communication, I think, of this great momentum that we are having now is impressive. So I have been in this sector for more than 20 years, and I have ever lived this moment with this perspective. But how to communicate this internally in our organization as well, and to drive this change is fundamental. And how to communicate this to the communities, to the people, is with real projects, with real plants that are producing energy in a sustainable way. This is the best way.
So seeing is believing. Deb?
And I would say that in Vermont, we've demonstrated that a clean energy economy drives prosperity, and that it drives a community prosperity, and that we don't have as much pollution. But it also has driven our economic and job growth. So we've got the second lowest unemployment rate in the nation because of solar jobs, because those are construction jobs. Lots of little jobs on the landscape. You can't outsource them to another part of the world. They're in your state. And so we have proven that this transition works really for everybody. And because it's been paired with this robust energy efficiency, we've actually had electric rate cuts these last, I think it was 3 out of the last 4 years. Now, that's not going to last forever because of a bunch of other market factors, but that is a sign, it's a demonstration that this really can work, not just for the world, but also right now for our communities.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to join me in thanking Rafael, Amal, and Deb. I think what you can pick up is that this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be linear. There's going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But when you can see the excitement and the innovation that's coming out of the utility sector, when you see the centrality of this mission to traditional development banks and how this is now at the forefront of how they see the challenges of ending poverty, and when you see states from Vermont and many others who are following them trying to build that bright, clean future with competitive jobs and healthy communities, then you can see that across all of the sectors that are needed in this transition, there is real movement and there is real leadership. Thank you very much indeed.